MultiGreen, building attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily real estate through impact investing.
Welcome to the MultiGreen podcast. I'm your host, Randy Norton, and in Season 1's inaugural episode, two-time Emmy and Murrow Award-winning journalist, Nkoyo Iyamba, will take the lead as we discuss attainability in today's housing market. Nkoyo was also the host and MC at our 2021 annual stakeholder meeting in Henderson, Nevada. Enjoy our conversation. Nkoyo, it's so great to have you here today. Thanks for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you, Randy. For me, I've been doing some research, and what I found is this question: is there a housing crisis in America? Well, Harvard researchers say absolutely. In fact, in the State of the Nation's Housing 2020 report released last November from the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University, here's a synopsis. It reads, for most of 2020, the country has been beset by the COVID-19 pandemic, social unrest sparked by longstanding racial injustice, and the devastating impacts of climate change. Although low interest rates and continued growth in some sectors have bolstered home buying and the broader economy, conditions have worsened for many households. Indeed, the nation's failure to live up to its long-stated goal of a decent home in a suitable environment for all has never been clearer, particularly in the lack of affordable rental housing and unequal access to home ownership. Today's crisis conditions call for a comprehensive re-envisioning of national housing policy. So, what do we do about this housing crisis? You are the expert, Randy. You are the founder and the chairman of MultiGreen, and you've been working on some solutions. So, Randy Norton, you have more than 20 years of experience, namely real estate development and construction, building information modeling, and leadership in energy and environmental design. Also, you're a managing partner and a global head of real estate and alternative investments at Green Mesa Capital, a single family office based in Henderson, Nevada. So, Randy, let's just dive right into this issue. For some people, the American dream remains, let's just say the word elusive. In a Wall Street Journal article by Nicole Friedman from June 2021, she reports that the housing crisis is a supply and demand problem. In your expert opinion, do you agree?
I absolutely agree.
Well, okay, awesome. But before you answer that, I probably should have set it up like this. Perhaps you can respond from the perspective that you created MultiGreen in 2019 as a real estate development and operating company specializing in ground up construction of affordable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily housing. So is this MultiGreen's way of responding to the housing crisis?
It is. MultiGreen is a consortium of several families that have come together to make a difference in the world, to make the world a better place. And we've chosen to create the MultiGreen vehicle to do that in Nkoyo. What we are doing is focusing on more affordable, basically attainable. We're focusing on attainability. Because we're constructing new buildings and new assets and new campuses, we are intertwining sustainability as well as tech enablement. And in fact, many of these multifamily homes are going to be nicer and more advanced than your home or mine. And we love that because as we are getting more involved, earlier on in the process as a capital solution provider, not only are we able to suggest this, but we're able to require it and demand it as a owner program requirement, as a design guideline. So yes, attainability is a huge issue. And during the pandemic, it's even exacerbated. The homes have increased in substantial value, and the cost of rent and the cost burden has also increased substantially. Nkoyo, this is not getting better anytime soon.
And you just said it's not getting better anytime soon. In fact, according to the Urban Land Institute, ULI, workforce housing, and we need to talk more about that term, workforce housing is defined as housing that's affordable to households earning between 60 and 120% of area median income. So we're talking about workforce housing targeting middle income workers, which include professions such as police officers, firefighters, teachers, healthcare workers, retail clerks, and the like. But Randy, researchers are saying, just like you did, that households who need workforce housing may not always qualify for federal housing programs that subsidize. So my question to you, MultiGreen publicly launched with an announcement from Davos, Switzerland on January 20th, 2020, just before the pandemic, yikes, at the 50th Annual World Economic Forum. So my question to you, Randy, is where and or how does MultiGreen fill in the gaps, or let's just say fill the need for workforce housing?
We agree with that definition from the Urban Land Institute. Our targeted consumer group is 80 to 120% of area median income. And the target markets that we have identified are really the markets outside of California. And in fact, our entire thesis is to short California and go long on the states and cities surrounding California. And this is our first phase and our first rollout. So that's Seattle and Portland. In fact, we would even go as north as Vancouver if the opportunity presented itself. But from Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, Boise, Reno, and Las Vegas, Phoenix, Albuquerque, and over to Dallas and Austin, these are, we call it ground zero for a huge lack of supply and tremendous job growth. And we are trying to focus in our backyard first and trying to solve these issues first here before we try to make any grand, ambitious rollout plans to go in other places in the United States or even throughout the globe. But we think that if we can figure it out here, we can figure it out anywhere. This is an issue that can get better. We do have a housing supply issue. There's more people that are needing and qualifying for housing, but there's just no supply being added. And in fact, if you look over the century, there has been a lot of homes that have come out of the housing stock because they have become old and dilapidated or functionally obsolete. And unfortunately, there hasn't been the labor workforce or the materials available at a cost-effective rate to produce or add supply in a significant way. So MultiGreen raised its hand and said, look, on a global stage, we're just going to be one of the first groups to commit to the 4 million units plus that are in deficit, just in the United States. It's far more than that if you look at the global issue. Even a recent study said it's more than 4 million. We know that it's somewhere between 4 and 6 million homes that we are short, and we want to focus and help that workforce housing. In fact, because we're building attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled homes, Nkoyo, we've actually termed it Workforce Plus. We actually trademarked the word Workforce Plus.
And I want to get to that. Workforce Plus. Talk to us about your vision for Workforce Plus.
The multifamily industry defines the workforce housing as a niche or a targeted demographic of 60 to 120% of area median income. That is the same demographic that we are targeting. The police officers, the firefighters, the nurses, the essential workers that helped us through COVID-19. They have great credit, they have very nice cars, and they have a very good lifestyle if they can just find better homes and homes that are close to their trade area of work. So Workforce Plus means all of the additional sustainability and digital amenities that we're going to be adding to our properties.
You mentioned supplies earlier, and I want to get to that. An article from the Colorado Sun from June 2021 showed housing developers praising an expected flow of government funds to support housing. But at the same time, this article also showed that there's this disconnect with infrastructure needs and financing as cost of materials to build remain astronomical. So if you were consulting, Randy, if you were consulting the powers that be today, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, first of all, we're not going to enter Colorado. We tried to enter Colorado, and in the city of Loveland, We couldn't make the project pencil, Nkoyo, even if the land was given to us for free. So the costs of shipping the materials and the supply chain over the Rockies makes these homes and multifamily communities cost the same amount in construction as it would in California, for example. But we're not getting California home prices, nor are we getting California rents to justify constructing that new product in Loveland, Colorado, for example. And that is just one example of many that I could share with you, in that we have a huge issue. Here we are, MultiGreen. We're trying to make a difference, and we are making a difference. And we've committed to build 40,000 units by 2030, which is about 1% of the needed housing stock. But even we can't make a difference in Colorado because it's cost prohibitive to do so. So we really need to look at other ways to construct and to deliver these assets in a much cheaper way. Maybe that is modular, maybe that is prefabrication. The lack of supply of material and the lack of supply of labor is exacerbating the issue. Maybe we also get more liberal with our international in-migration, which would increase the workforce. But right now, we are having a hard time supporting the workforce that we need on just the sites that we are constructing.
And are you able to consult with government groups, private groups on how to overcome this?
There are very large lobbying groups that are doing this now in Washington, D.C., the Urban Land Institute, but it's going to take many years, I think, before we see action. You know, you look at the sustainability movement. You started seeing in the 60s, you know, these things, these tree huggers, if you will. You saw in the 70s additional progress, in the 80s. I remember when I was in high school in the 90s, you started seeing the recycling bags. Last decade, the United States really started addressing some of the fossil fuels. And now in this decade, we're really starting to see the millennials step up and demand sustainability in their job selection as well as in their investment selection. I think the same thing is happening with affordability and attainable housing. I think we're still another decade or two away before all of the policies and subsidies or other innovations really help us here on the ground floor. By 2030, I think we're going to have a very large case study here at MultiGreen to say, hey, this worked or that didn't work. Mixed income worked or it didn't work. Maybe there's additional private activity bond allocations that can come from the federal government down to the states, which we can then reallocate as we so choose. But even now, some of these policies aren't being used or implemented because even with the subsidies, these projects don't pencil.
And when you say they don't pencil, let's talk about what we need. You've talked about lobbying groups, but what about the people that it actually impacts? As MultiGreen has coined it, Workforce Plus. What can they do? I mean, 10 years sounds like a long time for people who need affordable housing. Is that a long time?
We've been doing this since 2019, and we're approaching 2022. In 3 years, it went by in a blink of an eye. It's going to come quick, and it's not a long time. I think by the time we start getting into our stride and others begin to follow, and we collectively pledge to solve this issue, this is compounding at a greater rate than we can add supply to the market. And if we can just get to equilibrium and keep up with the housing formation demand, that is the starting point.
So it's not so much that we need people, say the Workforce Plus community, those who this housing need impacts. It's not just them getting their boots on the ground, knocking on doors of their congressional representatives. Is it, or is that what needs to happen to shrink that 10-year time down to maybe 5?
The biggest expense for us is land and the basis of land. During the pandemic, land has increased substantially in value because home demand has increased and the values have all gone up for all home and residential assets. I would say that in addition to that, we need quicker time to market. It takes sometimes 4 years for us to go from a purchasing of land to starting construction. There's just so much bureaucracy in that process. That needs to be automated, or certainly much more process-oriented than it is now. And then, of course, we still have the NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard. Many communities do not want attainable or any subsidized housing near them. They feel that it devalues their community, which is actually not true. This is going to be something that we observe very carefully, and we're documenting it very carefully. We're doing green papers with academics to help us better understand these desired outcomes. And so attainability is our number one goal. Right now, there's too many of our renters and too many of our home residents, they're cost burdened, and they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. That is unacceptable.
Well, you did mention something that piqued my interest. And Randy, as you know, racial disparities persist in housing markets. You just mentioned NIMBYism. And I think that we can add that to racial disparities into that NIMBYism. In fact, that 2020 Harvard study that I referenced at the top of the show, it shows that people of color are heavily concentrated in high poverty neighborhoods and underrepresented in higher income areas. And nearly 2/3 of the poor Black, Hispanic, and Native American populations live in communities with poverty rates above 20%. That's about twice the share of poor white Americans. So they, according to this study, they have far higher cost burden rates and account for a disproportionately large share of the homeless population. Additionally, the Black-white homeownership gap is larger than it has been in decades, at fully 31 percentage points. Randy, my question to you is, what's MultiGreen's response to these disparities?
Those disparities are unacceptable. That's why we created MultiGreen. We want to address these facts head on and try to do our part in society as a stakeholder. I do think that we at MultiGreen can do a better job at building communities at or near job areas and trade areas. One of the biggest cost burdens, in addition to rent or home ownership, is the cost of transportation to and from employment centers. And that needs to be fixed, first and foremost, I think. Transportation costs, and transportation is not available to everybody. Whether it's public transportation or private transportation, it's just not available.
We're talking about infrastructure.
Infrastructure. And in fact, many people would say that housing is now an infrastructure cost. I've read that in some recent studies. Can you imagine if housing did qualify as an infrastructure investment? There would be tons of foreign direct investment and capital that would come into this space. And it really is infrastructure. It's the infrastructure of how we house and live as a community. So I think there needs to be some paradigm shifts. Also, what happens, Nkoyo, is when some of these new communities are built, we've seen a lot come in the opportunity zones in the last couple of years. It's, again, building a product that these same community members cannot afford. So I don't know what the answer is, but we need more supply. Our whole thesis here at MultiGreen is supply side economics. And as more supply becomes available, hopefully we can curtail some of these cost burdens that are occurring, not just in my city, but nationwide.
So this is what I'm hearing. In fact, communitarian communities or environments would say, it takes an entire village. So we're talking about the officials, congressional leaders, the people who it impacts, who these issues of housing impact. So how is MultiGreen meeting with these community leaders to talk about the vision and mission?
We have found the community leaders to be very engaging and supportive of the MultiGreen initiative, and they're pointing us to programs that might help our specific communities, whether that's through density bonuses, tax abatements, programs that would help us enhance the benefits of our community. And that has been wonderful to see. At the end of the day, we still need land. We still need materials shipped to the site, which isn't happening right now because of all of the pandemic and the backlog of supply chain issues. And we need labor. And so it's a perfect trifecta causing this attainability crisis. But what we're doing is we are forward thinking and future proofing our design. So what we want to do, Nkoyo, is design it once and build it many times. It's a philosophy of high volume rollout. We are looking to what Walmart did, what Extra Space Storage has done in some regards. We're looking at what Marriott has done. And we want to have a very specific brand and a very specific rollout, no matter what city we go into. And that design cost should help us speed up our timing to market.
I'd like to hear some of these stories. I imagine you've been at this. MultiGreen has been at this since 2019. I bet you have some really great stories to share about the impact that you've made in some communities already.
We have been doing this before 2019 as a capital allocator and an investor in this space. But it was 2019 when Green Mesa and IX came together to form this very specific initiative of just developing more supply and focusing on attainable housing. But we have had some great experiences. I'll just share one. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, we have identified an opportunity set to build about 1,000 to 1,200 units. And you think Albuquerque, New Mexico, well, yeah, I was unaware of it too before it was brought to my attention. But in so many respects, it's like Green Valley here in Henderson, Nevada. And it just so happens that the landowner there was also from Green Valley here in Nevada, and he was my neighbor before he moved to Albuquerque. But we are building these units directly across the street from a brand new elementary school, middle high school, and high school. And there's even some new churches in that area. And we have had a flood of activity with interest, the news, city officials reaching out to us. They are so excited to see outsiders coming in and trying to add supply to that specific area. It's the northwest area of Albuquerque, which oftentimes gets overlooked, but it is also the newer area of Albuquerque. And what we're seeing is we are the very first LEED Platinum project in the entire state of New Mexico that is multifamily homes. We are the very first project in New Mexico to implement fuel cells and a microgrid on the campus so that our energy costs should be close to nothing to our residents. It should be just inclusive in the rent cost. And the tech enablement features that we've been able to do from a smart home automation will be second to none. So even though we're in Albuquerque, New Mexico, it would be equivalent to living in a Class A multifamily project in any gateway city in the United States today.
I have to tell you that we can't solve all the world's problems, but I would need to bring this up. Climate change, it continues to be a trending and hot button topic. But we're going to steer away from politics today. The Harvard, right, Randy?
That's fine. Sustainability is front and center here.
That's right. In fact, the Harvard researchers found that in 2020, the United States experienced 16 distinct billion-dollar natural disasters, making 2020 one of the 3 worst on record. Now, the cost of damages, according to the study, neared $50 billion as of September 2020, so really just a year ago, surpassing the total for all of 2019. So the research is looking at climate change, is also adding to the number of low-income households facing energy insecurity. So this was especially true during the record summer heat when the need for air conditioning was extreme, which added to utility bills for households with access to air conditioning and threatened the health and the lives of those without. Now, green energy, it's part of MultiGreen's company name, the goal, the mission, it's just in your bones, right?
That's right.
What's MultiGreen's role in helping to work to mitigate the footprint that adds to negative results of climate change?
Real estate and new construction is one of the biggest polluters and one of the biggest contributors to the carbon footprint in the world. And that is why we're very self-conscientious about building green and building sustainable. For us, there was 2 ways we could do it. We could either go find existing properties and retrofit them to make them sustainable or net zero. And for us, the capitalist inside of us said, hey, that's cost prohibitive. And even after doing that, There's very few case studies that I knew of where it was achieving the underwriting returns that we would have expected. But there's a great case study out there. The Empire State Building did it, and their rents have increased. Their demand for office space has increased. They've done a very good job there. But for us, we knew that there was a huge demand for multifamily, and there was nobody doing it in a sustainable way. And we knew that if we were going to get involved and get more into the design of these assets, that the very first place we started was energy efficiency. So yeah, Nkoyo, this is a really exciting time to be in this industry and in this space. The technology innovations have finally gotten to the point where it's affordable to implement. Maybe even 5 years ago, it was not that way. So I would challenge everybody, if you're building a new home, office, or any property in the built environment, it's easy to strive for a net zero outcome today. The technology exists. You just got to pay up for it and figure out how to solve for it.
Randy, are people intimidated by tech-enabled homes?
Our experience is they're not intimidated, they demand it. They now know what smart apps can do, whether it's security features, access, controlling your blinds, getting internet access and Wi-Fi access through the entire property, paying your bills, requesting a maintenance item. There's all sorts of things that are enhancing the way that we can live. And for too long, the people that have been living in multifamily units, specifically Class B, Class C, and Class D units, have not had these benefits. And today that's changing with MultiGreen.
Well, this must be a challenge, though, for MultiGreen, because I can only imagine that technology or the spaces in which to build are not up to speed with the need. Am I off on that? Help me out.
So another place that we start is in the digital infrastructure. We are going to make our digital amenities more attainable for our residents. And yes, it is overwhelming to think about implementing microgrids and fiber optic networks throughout the community. But that's our responsibility. That's where our core expertise comes from. And we're pivoting out of data centers, and we're bringing that same technology and skill set into the multifamily environment. In fact, we view these multifamily properties in Nkoyo as data centers with people inside of them. And if designed correctly, then they are going to be very much in demand. All of our residents are going to be very pleased with the technology packages available to them. They will surpass, again, anything in any community, in any city in the United States today.
I like that. Data centers with people inside. That's a great picture.
Yes, we are we're technologists first and finance professionals second. And with that in mind, this is another one of those requirements when somebody wants to use us for one of their properties.
Randy, this is what I'm hearing. It's obviously MultiGreen. You all have the plan, you have the mission, you know what to do. But I feel like, as I always say, the government is at least a decade, if not two, behind everybody else in terms of technology. But everybody needs to come on board to make this happen. What can we do to help move things along? What can we do to help MultiGreen help move things along?
Oh, thank you for asking that. If we could find more cities and more landowners that wanted to make a difference in their community and create a legacy, these properties will be in service for the next 100 years or more. We are building them with sustainable materials. Governments should want this. Municipalities should want this. And it's going to enhance our workforce and their living environment. If we have a better workforce, we're going to have better services, we're going to have better infrastructure, we're going to have better job growth, and our economies will lift, all boats. And at the end of the day, what we're really trying to focus on here in Nkoyo is the family in the home. And we're going to be talking more about that, during this entire season. It starts with the family in the home. And if we can get that right, we can get better jobs, we can get better education, we can get better infrastructure. The communities will care. And right now, all of our homes are being attacked with distractions and Our parents are not in the homes as much as they used to be historically. So I think what the governments can help us do is to encourage economic growth, encourage job growth, and diversify the trade areas so that not all jobs are just in one location. In any given city, we should spread the wealth and create additional equities that maybe haven't been there historically.
Randy, you said it before that it sounds like you actually agree with the Wall Street Journal reporter that this is a supply and demand issue. So while construction could be a key component of the country's economic recovery, the supply of homes for sale has not kept pace with the demand. And that's according to this Harvard study. It says with historically low interest rates contributing to demand, only 1.47 million existing homes were on the market in September, which is the lowest level in decades. Obviously, coronavirus has impacted the entire world, and it's impacted MultiGreen, I can imagine. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted MultiGreen?
That's a very good question. I would say it has encouraged me to know that we are in the right place at the right time, doing the right product for the right demographic. We are targeting these essential workers that helped us through the pandemic, number one. What we did see is asset prices. They increased. There certainly is some aspect of inflation. I don't know if that's temporary or if that's structural, but the long-term trend is things are getting more expensive, including homes, and it's because of the supply chain. For one of many reasons. It's the supply chain that's been disrupted during the pandemic. There's less labor available because of the pandemic and because of our migration laws. There is less material. Everything is congested. This confluence of all of these variables are exactly the things that we were trying to solve for when we launched the company in 2019. We knew that if we could cut the waste of time, cut the waste of financing cost, and cut some waste from our material cost, that we could deliver a more attainable product. And here we are just facing it, in the jaws of death. We are literally seeing all three of those make our lives very challenging at MultiGreen. For example, our very first project out of the gate, we underwrote it at a $68 million cost. And by the end of our total closing, we were at almost $98 million, a $30 million increase. That is unsustainable. That is unattainable. And that certainly is not using technology to make these projects more efficient. But what also did happen during that same period, rents went up 14, 17% year over year. Asset valuations went north year over year. And it's almost like that didn't even happen because there's this huge reset happening in the pricing of assets. Now, we will bring down some of these costs as we buy out the trades, but I'm just giving you an example. Yeah, the pandemic has definitely brought all of this front and center, especially with people working from home. So now we have to design these buildings more efficiently. We have to deliver them in a cheaper way. We have to be able to anticipate the infrastructure needs, not only of transportation and employment, but of their digital infrastructure so that they can work from home. The list just goes on and on and on of all of the variables that we're trying to solve. And at the very end of the day, what we need is more supply. 1.47 million existing homes on the market is about half of what it needs to be on an annual basis.
And part of this study basically is saying that there needs to be a case made for national housing agenda. And according to MultiGreen's goals and mission, that's what you do. You specialize in ground up construction of attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily housing. How do we continue to push that forward? I know I've asked that several times, but I'm just feeling like, obviously, if there's supply, if there's not enough land to get what we need, then there needs to be other things going on to help make these things available. I'm all about action.
If I could say just one thing, we need about 100 more MultiGreen companies. to even make a dent in the housing market. And that is
Wow.
the fact. We are trying to just lead and make a very simple case study of 40,000 units, which I think in itself is very bold and ambitious. But please, others listening to this podcast, follow our lead, work with us, reach out with us. Let us inform you of the mistakes that we've made so that we can learn and grow together. If we could build somewhere between 4 and 6 million units over the next 10, 15 years, we're going to get this back to equilibrium.
And that, Randy, is what makes MultiGreen a leader in this space. Thank you so much for all the information about attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily housing. I so look forward to hearing what's coming up in this season.
Thank you for being with us today, Nkoyo. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Join us as we build 40,000 attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily homes by 2030. And if you like the content you're hearing, hit the subscribe button. Follow us at Think MultiGreen and sign up to learn more at www.multi.green.